Hello, and welcome to our Bitesize Risk Assessment Training course, brought to you by Alcumus PSM. In this course, we will be looking at the process to follow as outlined in the HSE guidance publication INDG 163, a brief guide to controlling risks in the workplace. During this bite-sized session, we will be describing a simple 5-step risk assessment process and looking at what is meant by the terms hazard and risk. We will then be considering the selection of controls needed to reduce risk to as low as is reasonably practicable by following the risk control hierarchy. So what actually is a risk assessment? Very often it is seen by some as a bureaucratic red tape exercise, creating excessive paperwork. Others may claim it is time consuming and gets in the way of getting the job done. It's all down to interpretation, and very often we can overcomplicate the process. In fact, it is a relatively simple exercise whereby we look at what we have got or what we are doing in the workplace that could cause harm to our employees or others, and how we can go about reducing the chance of that harm happening. A risk assessment is essential in ensuring that we have given thought to what we are doing and how we are doing it, so that we make the right decisions as to how we minimise risk. There is no single definitive way of doing a risk assessment. There are many techniques, some of which are quite complex, which would be appropriate for high-risk environments such as the chemical processing industry. There are also specific types of assessment for specialist topic areas, such as manual handling, control of substances hazardous to health, or use of display screen equipment. Although covering different topics with slightly different techniques, they all follow a similar theme, as described in the HSE guide. The risk assessment outlined in the guide is a simple 5-step process, as described on the slide. Starting with identifying the hazards, then looking at who could be harmed, so the people involved, then carrying out an evaluation of the risks, considering what existing control measures are in place and what further controls may need to be implemented. We then need to document the findings and then review the assessment when it has become no longer valid. So let's look at those steps in a bit more detail. First of all, we need to identify the hazards. A hazard is described as something with the potential to cause harm. This could be a physical hazard, such as a trailing cable, or a sharp blade, or a noisy environment. It could be a chemical hazard, such as a toxic substance that could poison you, or dust and fibres that you could inhale. Or it might be a biological hazard, such as a virus that could infect you and cause ill health. There are also psychological hazards, and these are the types that may cause stress in some individuals, such as having to work in isolation at home. If you have a room full of hazards and you shut the door and there are no people in that room, then you don't have a problem. You only have a problem when people interact with the hazards. This is termed a hazardous event. So if you have somebody who comes into contact with a virus, then you have the potential for that person to become infected. So let's look at people in the workplace. We have got to consider all groups and categories of persons who could come into contact with a hazard, including non-employees, such as contractors and visitors. We need to determine how they could come into contact with the hazard and what sort of effect it may have on those different groups. We also need to identify those who may be considered more vulnerable than others due to individual characteristics. The next step is to evaluate the risk. And first of all, we've got to consider what is the likelihood of the hazardous event occurring. This will be influenced by a number of factors, such as how frequently are we exposed to the hazard and for what length of time. The longer and more frequent the exposure, then the more likely the hazardous event could occur. It will also depend on the existing control measures and how effective they may be. From this information, we will determine whether the hazardous event is unlikely, likely, or highly likely to occur. If it does occur, we then need to consider what would be the severity of the outcome. And this could range from a minor injury or health concern to serious injury or ill health, or ultimately death, and would again be dependent on a number of factors, including, particularly in the case of ill health, how vulnerable that person may be due to their individual characteristics. To enable us to determine what controls are appropriate, we need to refer to expected legal standards given in regulations and approved codes of practice, and also guidance and best practice given by authoritative bodies such as the Health and Safety Executive. Very often the requirement to follow regulations is qualified by the wording "as far as is reasonably practicable," which means that the cost of implementing a control measure needs to be balanced against the actual risk posed and should not be grossly disproportional. We should always consider the best way of reducing risk. However, it may not always be reasonably practicable to implement it. It's always best if you can eliminate the hazard completely. Think about window cleaners who, instead of working off ladders, now stand at ground level using a pole with a brush on the end, therefore eliminating the need to work from height. Of course, it is not always possible to eliminate. So then we move to the next level, which is reduce the level of the hazard. This could be by using a chemical that is less toxic, but still does the same job. Or in case of a virus, restricting the amount of time spent in a situation where the virus could be transmitted. If these types of control are not reasonably practicable, then we move to the next level down, which is prevent contact with the hazard. So this could be guards on dangerous rotating parts of machinery, or in the case of a virus, remaining at a safe distance from a possible source. If these are not reasonable practical solutions, then move down a level to safe systems of work. These are procedures to follow, like regular hand washing where there is a risk of biological infection. Then lastly, provide PPE. We consider personal protective equipment as a last resort, as it is generally the least effective option. However, it may be the only reasonably practical control measure that's available, or indeed it is used in conjunction with other control measures. In fact, a control strategy may involve one or more elements of the risk control hierarchy. Underpinning all of the control measures is the provision of adequate information, training and supervision. Once we've completed the assessment thought process, we have got to record our findings. We have to record the significant findings where we have 5 or more employees. The significant findings are everything we have discussed so far, and the way that you do that is up to you, but it must meet the legal standard of being suitable and sufficient. It is also a requirement to review the risk assessment when it is no longer valid. This could be because there has been some significant change, or an accident has occurred, or a significant amount of time has lapsed since the last review. During this bite-sized session, we described the simple 5-step risk assessment process, and we identified what is meant by the terms hazard and risk. We also considered the selection of controls needed to reduce risk to as low as reasonably practicable by following the risk control hierarchy. So to conclude, the purpose of carrying out a risk assessment is to help employers determine what they should be doing to keep employees and others safe from hazards in the workplace. We hope you've enjoyed this bite-sized course and that it has helped explain the risk assessment process. If you need help in implementing your health and safety or human resource management arrangements, then please contact Alcumus PSM on 01484 439 930 or visit our website www.alcumusgroup.com. Thank you for listening and goodbye.